All right, let's jump right in. Picture this. You're a junior engineer. The adrenaline is just starting to wear off after a massive system outage, and you're sitting down with a senior SRE to write up the incident report. Phew, the alarms have finally stopped ringing, but honestly, the real work of reliability is just getting started. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to crack open a blank Notion sandbox and look at exactly how elite engineering teams turn chaotic outages into hardened systems. And they do it using the blameless postmortem.
Now, it's a super frustrating reality for a lot of teams. You're probably sitting there asking yourself, why do the exact same system outages keep happening? Well, the short answer is kind of painful. We spend way too much time fixing the symptoms, and just not enough time fixing the systems themselves. You know how it is, when an incident is finally resolved, everyone just wants to breathe and get back to their sprint work. But leaving a postmortem uncompleted or just sort of half-baking it literally leaves the door wide open for the exact same failure to strike again. And that brings us to a pretty stark statistic: less than 50%. According to the data, fewer than half of organizations actually have a mature incident learning process with consistent follow-through on their action items. The other half? Their postmortems basically vanish into a backlog black hole. And by doing that, they're silently agreeing that it's totally acceptable to suffer the exact same outage all over again. Crazy, right? So, to make sure we land in that successful 50%, here's our roadmap for today. 1. Why postmortems fail. 2. The anatomy of a blameless doc. 3. Building the timeline. 4. Root cause analysis. And 5. Actionable follow-ups. Section 1. Why postmortems fail. So, the two biggest culprits for failure here are a toxic culture of blame and the dreaded execution gap. Let's look at how we frame failure. Take the bad example here. John pushed a bad config to production. I mean, if we write this in our document, John is going to be absolutely terrified to ever deploy code again. Now look at the good example. We pivot to a blameless, system-focused sentence. The CI/CD pipeline lacks environment variable validation. See the difference? We aren't pointing fingers at John. We're exposing a vulnerability in our tooling. This perfectly hits the nail on the head regarding a core maxim from the Google SRE team. You can't fix people, but you can fix systems and processes. Seriously, for a postmortem to actually work, we absolutely have to assume that everyone involved had good intentions and they did the right thing with the information they had at the time. That kind of psychological safety, it's literally a requirement for honest reporting. Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of a Blameless Document. Okay, so with our blameless mindset locked in, let's open up our Confluence sandbox and generate our template. This thing has to act as your single source of truth. It needs these core sections. First, an executive summary, so anyone can grasp the scope in like 30 seconds. Then, an impact section with quantified metrics. Think lost revenue or failed requests. Next, a strictly chronological timeline. After that, the root cause analysis. And finally, the action items for accountable fixes. Section 3. Building the timeline. A shared chronological timeline is basically the backbone of our whole document, mainly because it instantly shifts the room from being defensive to being collaborative. Let's anchor this in a real-world sandbox scenario. Imagine we're writing up the devastating 45-minute payment processing outage we all just survived. Fun times, right? We build this timeline out step by step, using exact timestamps. At T0, our automated alert fires for 500 errors. 5 minutes in, the on-call engineer acknowledges the alert. At 15 minutes, we note that pods are stuck in a crash loop backoff state. Fast forward to 30 minutes, we identify a misconfigured database connection string. And finally, at 45 minutes, a mitigation is deployed and traffic is restored. By mapping it out like this, and honestly, this is often automated these days by tools pulling straight from Slack, we get a completely objective sequence of events. Section 4. Root cause analysis. Now that we know why it happened, we have to dig into why it happened. The trick here is getting way past the surface error by using the 5 whys technique. So, why did the API return 500 errors? Well, because the payment service was unreachable. Okay, why? Because the pods were crashing. Why? Because a config update altered the DB connection string. So why was a bad config allowed to ship in the first place? Because our deployment pipeline lacks environment variable validation. Boom. We just went from a surface-level glitch all the way down to an underlying systemic gap, missing CI/CD governance. Section 5. Actionable follow-ups. All right, we've identified the root cause. Now we actually have to close that execution gap. And you've got to hear this hard truth from reliability expert Benjamin Charity. If everyone owns it, no one owns it. It's so true. If you assign an action item in your document to, say, the backend team, or you just leave the owner as TBD, I guarantee you it is going to rot in a Jira backlog forever.
And this graph from Google SRE perfectly illustrates what happens when we don't assign strict ownership. It shows the cumulative number of action items created versus closed. See that widening gap right in the middle? Yeah, that is post-mortem technical debt. It's basically this massive pileup of uncompleted tasks that leaves our systems completely vulnerable to experiencing the exact same outage tomorrow.
So let's fix that. Here's a direct comparison for you. On the left, we have a basically useless bad action item, investigate the database leak, with the owner marked as TBD. I mean, there's no deadline, there's no specific task, and no accountable person. It's useless. Now, on the right, a good action item, add connection pool tests for payment endpoints, owned by Sarah, due on March 19th. See? It is highly specific, it's accountable, and it's measurable. Zooming back out on our Notion sandbox page, this is what a finished, completely bulletproof follow-up plan actually looks like. We've got the fixed description to address that CI/CD pipeline gap we found, and it's categorized as a preventative fix. Crucially, we have a named human owner for every single task, a hard due date, and a measurable success metric. Doing the whole shebang like this ensures that the lesson we just learned actually gets baked right into our infrastructure.
All right, let's quickly summarize the core takeaways from today's explainer, just to make sure they really stick. First, automate your timeline capture wherever possible. Save yourself from doing manual archaeology. Second, always blame systems and processes, never people. Third, use those 5 whys to drill down to the true systemic gap. Fourth, assign real, named owners and actual due dates to your fixes. And finally, track the completion of those action items relentlessly so you don't drown in technical debt.
I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to take back to your teams. Is your current post-mortem document a true catalyst for system resilience? Or is it just a receipt for a painful lesson that your organization paid for but never actually collected? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.